Junior Motorsports could make more starts in the Cup Series in 2025 and may eventually go full-time in 2026, and Aric Almirola will return to the NASCAR Xfinity Series with Joe Gibbs racing on a part-time basis in 2025. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got some NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just show them those really quickly. We're first going to take a look at a couple paint schemes that have been revealed over the course of the last couple days. Let's go ahead and just show them straight into them. The first paint scheme we're taking a look at is Ryan Ellis's 2025 Pella News scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Paint scheme looks really good in my opinion. Love the yellow, love the white number. It looks really solid, really good. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack this weekend. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Gio Ruggiera's 2025 First Auto Group scheme that we'll see in select races in 2025, including this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. I think this scheme looks really cool in my opinion. The colors mismatch in a pretty decent way in my opinion, but they also match in a pretty good way as well. Looking forward to seeing on the racetrack throughout the year. The next paint scheme we're taking a look at is Daniel Dye's 2025 SMA scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Scheme looks alright in my opinion. Colors look decent, but it's not the best paint scheme I've seen from Daniel Dye in college racing this year. It's an alright paint scheme. And the final paint scheme we're taking a look at is Akinori Ogata's 2025 Kiowa scheme that we'll see this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway for his team's Truck Series debut. Scheme, in my opinion, looks pretty good. It's also great to see Akinori Ogata back in the Craftsman Truck Series in 2025. He's got a nice look at paint scheme to go with that this weekend. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Blaney. As it was announced earlier today that Ryan Blaney has officially partnered up with Chipotle, and Chipotle will have their first partnership with the NASCAR driver in 2025 with Ryan Blaney. They're going to have some endorsement stuff of Ryan Blaney throughout 2025, and Chipotle is going to be more involved with the sport as the year progresses and goes on. Chipotle has partnered up with multiple drivers multiple people in the sports world over the course of the last couple of years, and I think it's really great to see they're expanding their horizons into the NASCAR world in 2025. I thought the trailer they did was really awesome and really cool. It looks really great. Nonetheless, really awesome to see that Chipotle will get the opportunity to work with Ryan Blaney in 2025 in a pretty big way. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about William Byron. Now, we do have a couple William Byron stories discussed today on the channel. The first one revolves around his Daytona 500 ring. Dustin Long from NBC Sports posted that Daytona 500 ring on his Twitter and X and his Instagram pages, showing the ring that William Byron does have for this year. It looks really good in my opinion. It looks kind of similar to some of the other ones that other drivers have had, like William Byron had last year in 2024. And I think the look of it looks really sleek. It looks really good, and it's pretty cool that William Byron does have his Daytona 500 ring once again for 2025. A really nice looking ring in my opinion. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Junior Motorsports. Now, we do have a couple Junior Motorsports stories discussed today on the channel. The first one revolves around in their first ever NASCAR Cup Series start. And Junior Motorsports came out with guns blazing in their first start. They survived a ton of crashes, they survived some of the big wrecks and carnage on the track, and they come home after surviving the last big wreck by finishing in the top 10 in their Cup Series debut with Justin Allgaier behind the wheel, finishing in 9th position. Honestly, very impressive for JRM. They showed some decent speed this weekend. They had to make their way in from the duels on Thursday, and they were up inside the top 10, top 15 near the end of the race. And like I mentioned, they survived a lot of the big wrecks and carnage to be up there at the end of the day. They didn't get involved in the last wreck, and I think it's really a major accomplishment to see Junior Motorsports and the number 40 team make it and do a really good job. They had a fantastic run. They did a really solid job for their debut. We'll talk about their future in the Cup Series because it sounds like they may make some more starts in 2025 potentially, but nonetheless, really glad to see that Junior Motorsports and Justin Allgaier were able to have a really strong, great run and finish in the top 10 in their first start. Congrats to them on a really solid and a really strong run in first race for the program. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Daytona 500. As it was reported by Trey Ryan, aka NASCAR Insights on Twitter, that 41 of the 45 cars were caught up in wrecks during speed weeks throughout the whole time. That I believe is a record for the Daytona 500 in most areas as well. The only 4 drivers that were not caught up in a wreck or incident, I believe, were BJ McLeod, who didn't even make the Daytona 500. William Byron went on to win the Daytona 500 this year. I believe I saw maybe that Riley Harris spun out. I think I saw some drivers in the back of the field that were not caught up in a wreck. I think John Hunter Nemechek was one of the other ones that didn't get caught up. I can't remember the other driver who was not caught up in the wreck and incident, but it just shows that super speedway races are absolutely wild, and sometimes you have to be the lucky one to not get caught up in a wreck throughout the weekend. Pretty much every other driver, except the 4 that I mentioned, were caught up in some major crash or some sort of incident throughout this event. We've seen a lot of these chaotic moments before. It's not shocking to see this during the Daytona 500. I'd like to see it change in some way, though. But same token, same time, it's crazy that 41 drivers out of the 45 that attempted this weekend, including Helio Castroneves, who had a disastrous weekend this time around. We'll talk about him here shortly, but I do think there were a lot of cars that were caught up in some big wrecks throughout this Daytona 500. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about William Byron once again. Now, earlier this evening, you probably saw us from the WWE account. If you're watching WWE Raw earlier tonight, you probably saw that William Byron was pulling up inside of the WWE area and had AJ Styles in the car, transporting AJ Styles to basically go perform in the net and perform on stage as well. I think that's absolutely huge for promotion, among other things. Obviously, William Byron, the 2025 Daytona 500 winner. I think it's really huge. You have someone like William Byron going and doing stuff with the WWE, which is continuing to grow in a pretty massive and major way. They've, of course, got endorsements from Prime with Logan Paul KSI, and, of course, they're doing more stuff with that group over there. But I think William Byron transporting AJ Styles after winning the Daytona 500, bringing that car out there and transporting AJ Styles to go basically have fun is really awesome to see. And I think that's really good for NASCAR as a whole. And from what I last saw, there were like around 10 to 15,000 people who had liked that tweet, which is really huge because they can grow NASCAR in a pretty big way, especially since now people may know that Atlanta Motor Speedway is coming up for the Cup Series, the Xfinity Series, and the Truck Series as well. But getting that promotion from the WWE is huge. Yes, both of the audiences from the WWE and NASCAR cross quite a bit many times, but I think WWE does have a bigger presence in the United States currently at the moment right now, and to see that we're seeing more promotion on that front and that aspect is absolutely wild, but I think it's also awesome to see. Really good to see that they're doing that and having fun with it, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Days of Thunder. As there was reported, I believe, by Steven Taranto and Peter Strada on Twitter last night that went after William Byron, of course, won the 2025 Daytona 500. There's also been a lot of talk conversations going on about the future of Days of Thunder, as there's been a lot of talk currently at the moment about a sequel going out for Days of Thunder in the future. And Jeff Gordon spoke on that when the multiple media members spoke to Jeff Gordon on this, and Jeff Gordon has talked to Tom Cruise and wants to be part of a Days of Thunder sequel. Now, the last time we saw a Days of Thunder movie was 1990 or 1991, so nearly 35 years since the last time Days of Thunder came out. And I think Days of Thunder, a sequel for, would absolutely be huge to grow the sport. We saw what Days of Thunder did, the original movie. It was a cult classic, and the first Days of Thunder is arguably the best racing movie that has probably ever been released. And we know some of the people that worked on the original Days of Thunder who are currently working on the Formula One movie, that being Jerry Bruckheimer. He's also very interested in going ahead and doing the movie as well. So I think that it would be pretty awesome to see a Days of Thunder sequel. Now, who would they play the characters upon? Who would Tom Cruise be like? My prediction is it would be very similar to Mark Martin's career. Mark Martin was pretty much not running full-time at the time around 2007 to 2008. Then in 2009, he got the opportunity to go over to Hendrick Motorsports and contended for a championship at the age of 50 years old. While Tom Cruise is a decade plus older than that at this point, I still think that Tom Cruise coming and doing a Days of Thunder sequel would be huge. And it'd be very similar to Top Gun Maverick. Top Gun Maverick was a massive, massive success in theaters, and I think having a Days of Thunder sequel with Tom Cruise, who wants to do this, by the way, I think that'd be absolutely huge. I think the window for that movie and time they do that, especially with Tom Cruise getting a lot older, is starting to close in, but I do think that if we could sooner rather than later get this movie out, the better it's going to be. I hope it happens. It'd be really huge for the sport as a whole. Let's see if we can actually end up happening, and I really hope we do get the opportunity and chance to see a Days of Thunder sequel in the not-so-distant future, because I think it'd be really good for the sport if it could happen, in my honest opinion. Now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about commercials during the Daytona 500. As it was reported by Jonathan Fell from the Racing Experts and JSki.com that according to them, Fox only had 18 minutes of full-screen commercials during the Daytona 500 in 2025. They had around 46 to 47 minutes of commercials throughout the whole entire Daytona 500, but there were a lot less of those throughout the year, as of course in 2024, I think they had around 53 to 54 minutes of full-screen commercial. That went down only to 18 minutes this year. Well, if you watched the race for the Daytona 500, as a matter of fact, you probably saw that during the race, there were a lot more side-by-side commercials. In fact, one thing I'm going to praise Fox on, at least for once, is that they were actually able to go ahead and show no green flag laps under full-screen commercial. That is a massive, massive positive for the sport as a whole. I've been also saying this for a very long time. If you have full-screen commercials happening all the time during these races, you're going to lose interest from the fans, and fans are going to go ahead and stop watching your race, which is something that you don't want to do, because fans are going to go find something easily to do, and they're not going to want to sit around watching 2 to 3 minutes of full-screen commercials. Yes, I would like to see less commercials as a whole, but I think this is a really great step toward the right direction of fixing the problem, because I think that at least this year, maybe something new that came in with the new TV deal coming in, and they tried this out last year, we saw multiple increases in double-digit increase as well in the TV ratings in 3 races that were shown on NBC and also USA last year. So I think this is a step in the right direction. I really hope this continues in 2025 this weekend at Atlanta. We're just going to have to wait and see. But it sounds like NASCAR really wants these people that are running these networks to start doing less full-screen commercials and more side-by-side commercials going forward into the future, which I think is a massive positive and a great step in the right direction, to be honest with you. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about the last lap at Daytona. Now, there was a lot of talk and conversation around the controversy of the last lap of the Daytona 500. Now, the last couple of nights prior to the Daytona 500, including on Thursday, NASCAR would throw the caution coming to the white flag of the event. Coming down the front straightaway during the Daytona duels, there's a big wreck happening behind the leaders of Austin Cindric and Erik Jones. NASCAR pushed the button really, really quickly, like 20 feet before the finish line, and instead of Erik Jones winning the race, Austin Cindric went to victory lane. Because they've heard all the people that were really frustrated on Twitter, they decided to go ahead and let them race back to the line as they were in turn number 3. Now, look, I did see a lot of people that are really, really frustrated with NASCAR on this call. Personally, I do think that NASCAR actually made the right call to let them race back to the line. But here's my issue I have with this. The lack of consistency. How come on Thursday you pushed the button 20 or 30 feet before the finish line, but you let him race back to the line? I don't like that inconsistency. I think they got the call right, don't get me wrong. If you have a big wreck on the front straightaway coming to the white flag and they hit the white flag line, yeah, you got to go ahead and throw the caution. I think that's where I'll agree with most people on. But I personally don't think that NASCAR did the wrong call this time around. But I want to see consistency. That's the frustrating thing about NASCAR, especially a lot of times, is NASCAR is consistently inconsistent. They've had this issue before in the past, and that's something that I don't want to see is overwhelmingly too much inconsistency, because that's one issue NASCAR's have when it comes to their fishing that I really do believe needs to be cleaned up. And I'm not sure in this day and era they're going to clean this up going forward. Again, though, I'm glad to see that they were able to let them race back to the line. It was the right decision. It should be how it goes going forward. But I don't know if NASCAR is going to continue on that consistency side of things, because NASCAR's had a tendency to not be consistent when it comes to these situations, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Richard Childress Racing. Now, there were a couple of very interesting pieces that Adam Stern had reported on over the last day or so. And very interesting quotes came out from this piece. According to Adam Stern, Richard Childress Racing wants to reassist itself as a home for NASCAR's core blue-collar fanbase under new president Mike Verlander. They also plan to say things that really not care much more about what they want to say going forward. You know what this feels like? This feels very similar to what Stewart-Haas Racing did last year in 2024. They're putting out all these ad campaigns and all these ad things. They were putting out all these things on their pages, basically saying that we're going to be like this and we're going to be like that. And then throughout the year, they started struggling quite a bit. They did, of course, get that win with Chase Briscoe during the Southern 500, but for the most part, they weren't a great organization, and the team really struggled, and by the end of the year, they closed up shop completely. Now, I don't think that Rich Schultz Racing is in that same position right now. I don't think his team is going anywhere anytime soon, considering that in the near future, Austin Dillon is probably going to retire and hang up the helmet and go to more of an executive role with the team going into the near future. Could happen at the end of this year, by the way. But I don't like the things that RCR is doing. I think instead of just saying we're going to be this team that reassists and basically asserts itself as the blue collar home, and also at the same time calling out 2011 Racing as well with the shoes, among other things, how about you focus on making better cars? How about you help Kyle Busch get your team to be really good once again? Because it's been 3 decades since you guys last won a championship. 1994. You've come close to winning championships with drivers like Kevin Harvick and Kyle Busch a little bit in 2023 and Jeff Burton. But you guys now got to focus on trying to win another championship and win races. And I just feel like putting all these slogans out, you're doing the same thing that Fenhaus Racing did, and it didn't really work out in your favor, in their favor especially, which is interesting because they've got multiple people from Fenhaus Racing that are over there at Rich Schultz Racing currently at the moment right now. But I do feel like for RCR, they shouldn't be doing this kind of stuff. They need to focus on getting their cars a lot better. Then if they're running up front a lot more like they were a couple years ago, then maybe you could start chatting crap or whatever. But I think personally, I wouldn't be going chatting crap because your team really struggled RCR. And Richard, you probably shouldn't be doing this stuff considering the fact, like I said, your team did not run very, very good. It didn't run very, very well. And I do think you guys need to focus, like I said, on trying to make your program a lot better because your Xfinity program's in a solid and good position, even though you had engine issues at Daytona, but your Cup program isn't in the best position right now, and it's a little bit concerning because you're getting outperformed by new teams like Trackhouse in 2311 and guys like Daniel Suarez and, of course, Shane Van Gisbergen and Bubba Wallace and Tyler Reddick, who was at your team previously. I would think you guys probably should go ahead and focus a lot more on trying to get your cars a lot better going forward, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Preece. Now, if you watched the Daytona 500 a couple days ago, you probably saw the really scary crash that Ryan Preece took going into turn number 3. Coming with 5 laps to go, going down the back straightaway, Christopher Bell would get a pretty bad push from Cole Custer going around into turn number 3. And Christopher Bell got hit really hard into the outside wall, would ricochet back down the racetrack, and would clip Ryan Preece. He would do a wheelie, then because he had no air and a ton of air going in below the bottom of the car, he would end up flipping upside down and do a 360 and flip multiple different times and basically have a ton of damage on the car, ending his night. And after the wreck had taken place, Ryan Preece spoke to the media after the race. He said he was okay after the wreck, but he was not very happy speaking to the media, and he called for changes to the next-gen car and also the super speedway racing as well. One thing that I have noticed in the next-gen era, especially with the next-gen car, is that these cars seem to flip a lot more frequently and a lot more consistently. And I think a big reason why we're seeing a lot more flips and a lot more carnage, especially during these next-gen super speedway races, is because of the underbody and the under tray. Many people in the industry have called for the underbody to be removed on these cars because if air gets below the bottom of that car with how flat the bottom of the car is, there's a really good chance and possibly the car is going to flip. This has not just been happening at super speedway tracks. We even saw it at Michigan. Corey LaJoie flipped upside down going down the back straightaway. In NASCAR, what they try to do at Daytona is they try to move the grass on the back straightaway, which I think we've been proving at this point that removing the grass really didn't do jack squat because we still got cars flipping upside down. And basically, roof flaps also did not deploy like they should have. And I do think there need to be changes in regards to this next-gen car going forward. The problem is NASCAR hasn't really done anything in much redesigning of the next-gen car. The last time we had a lot of flips happen, which was the COT around 2008. In 2010, they would get rid of the wing and go back to a normal car in the middle of 2010. It actually made the racing a lot better than it had prior in the last 2 years of the Gen 4 car, the Gen 6 car, or the Gen 5 car, I should say. So I really think that there have to be some changes to this next-gen car. Again, I do understand that you're going to have big wrecks in these types of events, and we're going to talk about some of my criticisms towards Super Speedway Racing here in just a short little bit. But overall, Ryan Preece is absolutely on the money. It's getting to the point where it's a little concerning, and at some point, the bubble's going to burst, and someone's going to get seriously hurt, just like what happened to Ryan Newman 5 years ago, unfortunately. And I think something like that, unfortunately, could end up happening down the road if things are not changed really, really quickly. It's very concerning to see all these big wrecks that are taking place at these tracks, and I desperately think, and many people are probably thinking this as well, there need to be major changes coming here soon. Otherwise, like I already mentioned and said, someone's going to get hurt, and it won't be good for the sport as a whole. I hope things change going forward soon, because I don't like the direction that Super Speedway Racing and racing at these types of tracks is going right now, and seeing these cars flip upside down is really scary and really concerning. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Luke Fenhaus. As it was confirmed early this morning that Luke Fenhaus will be back with ThorSport Racing in 2025 for majority races in 2025, driving a number 66 truck starting this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. The number of races was not confirmed today, but it's expected he's probably going to run close to double-digit races in the number 66 car in 2025. We talked about this on the channel earlier today, or a couple days ago when you're watching this video. We talked about the fact that they were teasing a big announcement in regards to ThorSport Racing on a driver that was going to be with the program, and I had heard that Luke Fenhaus is going to be with this team for quite a few races in 2025. This is absolutely the right decision. Luke Fenhaus is a very underrated race car driver. The guy won the Slinger Nationals, I believe, a couple years ago and made 2 starts in the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series in 2024 with ThorSport Racing, and generally looked like a superstar out on the racetrack. In his debut in the Truck Series, yes, he spun out, but he came back to finish inside of the top 10. In his second race, I think at IRP, he finished around the top 15 to top 20 area. I think Luke Fenhaus is going to surprise a lot of people in a pretty big way throughout 2025. Now, this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway, because I don't think he has a lot of Super Speedway experience, I don't think he's going to be a major factor in serious contender. But coming at tracks like Gateway, well, they're not Gateway this year, but going to tracks like Bristol not too far down the road, which I think he would make a start with that team at some point, and maybe even Martinsville especially, he'll be one guy to watch out for. And I think he'll be one of the better performers at ThorSport Racing in 2025. Now, one question that's going to get asked, what about Connor Jones? I don't think Connor Jones is with this program anymore, and I don't believe Connor Jones is making any starts with this team in 2025 at all. Connor Jones, I think, got fired at the end of last year, especially with some of the off-track antics, the suspension that happened, and some of the stuff that happened in Phoenix especially. I do think they don't want him near that team going forward anymore, and his opportunity in NASCAR, even at the age of 18, might already have come to a close because they're really frustrated with some of the antics that he had put on the racetrack. And personally, last year, they should put Luke Fenhaus in that truck full-time instead of Connor Jones, because Connor Jones did not have the maturity to be a full-time driver in the sport. So I'm very happy for Luke. This is a really great and fantastic opportunity, and I do think that Luke Fenhaus is going to surprise some people in a pretty massive and pretty big way in 2025. Can't wait to see what he'll do this year with ThorSport Racing. I do think he's going to be very fast, and I think he'll certainly be very competitive with this organization in the 2025 NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series season. I think it's going to definitely be a big year for him with that team. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Joey Logano. Now, of course, if you watched the Daytona 500 a couple days ago, you saw another pretty big wreck that took place going down the back straightaway with around 15 laps to go in the event. So going into turn number 1, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. tried to put a really aggressive block on Joey Logano going into turn number 2. Joey Logano was not very happy about the block that Ricky Stenhouse Jr. had tried to pull on him, so Logano tried to go behind him and send it 3 wide through the middle of the track. He goes into Ricky Stenhouse Jr., turns Ricky Stenhouse Jr., then this clips Ryan Blaney, then this collects Kyle Busch, and other drivers like Noah Gragson and Chase Elliott also are caught up in the big incident and big wreck going down the back straightaway. Both drivers would make comments in regards to the situation. Joey Logano did put some blame on Ricky Stenhouse Jr. for the over-aggressiveness of the blocks, and Ricky Stenhouse Jr. also blamed Logano for being way too aggressive. But it wasn't just those two that had certain comments about it. Jeff Gordon called Joey Logano an idiot, which is not the first time that Jeff Gordon has called out Joey Logano in the past, but he called Joey Logano an idiot and one of the dumb people on the racetrack that night, and even William Byron agree with that. And Kyle Busch also was not very happy with Joey Logano by saying that Joey had the fastest car on the track and drove like an idiot near the end of the race. Looking at the crash and the incident, some are going to put blame on one driver, that being Stenhouse. Some are going to put blame on the other driver, that being Joey Logano. To me, I think both were at fault in this crash. Number one, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. was way too aggressive trying to put a block coming off the corner. Not the smart decision a driver can make, especially when Joey Logano is super, super aggressive. The other one, I blame Joey Logano. Logano tried to go 3 wide through the middle in a gap that wasn't there. It was an unnecessary move on Joey Logano's part, and that move is something that just did not need to happen, and it was completely avoidable. But when you put Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Joey Logano together, it's like oil and water trying to mix together. It just doesn't work. When you've got two drivers that are over-aggressive, they're going to have situations like this. But this kind of stuff with these two, because, again, they were super aggressive all night long. And, yeah, they both have won a lot of super speedway races and Fenhaus a lot more, especially in recent years. But sometimes they race like idiots on the track and they cause some of the big wrecks and carnage. But, again, to me, when I do look at the big wreck and incident again, I do have to, like I said, put blame equally on both guys. I'm not in this situation gonna put more blame on one guy than I'm gonna put blame on the other. Because to me, I think both were equally at fault for the wreck and incident, and I think you should be some equal blame going to both drivers for causing the wreck that took Kyle Busch out of an opportunity to get a win in the Daytona 500 in his 20th try at the track. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Martin Truex Jr. Now, Martin Truex Jr.'s night at the Daytona 500 came to an unfortunate end with Tricon Garage and unfortunately fell the race at early starts of stage number 2 after the water cooler broke in the car after getting caught up in the first big wreck of Ross Chastain running Helio Castroneves and, of course, Truex getting collected in that big wreck. He would go to the garage and his night would come to an end after having a pretty solid qualifying performance and doing pretty solid in the duels as well. Now, Martin Truex Jr. was asked by the media about his plans going forward in the NASCAR Cup Series. He did confirm to Alan Cavana that he will likely have another NASCAR Cup Series start scheduled in the future at some point in 2025, but he has had no confirmation on what race exactly he is going to be running and what team he will end up driving for in 2025. He also did confirm to other media members, including Bob Pockrass, that it sounds like he's interested in running the Daytona 500 once again in the near future, including in 2026. I would love to see Martin Truex Jr. come back and do another Daytona 500. I'd like to see him make more starts in the NASCAR Cup Series as well, because Martin Truex Jr. showed he still had it with Cole Pearn. And he showed he had the pace and speed to be very competitive in this year's Daytona 500. And I think it'd be cool to see him have the chance and opportunity to run the Daytona 500 once again. Now, the big question is going to be, what team could he drive for? I look at Tricon. There's a lot of rumors and speculation that Tricon is going to make more starts in the NASCAR Cup Series down the road. I don't think that this run in the Daytona 500 is going to be the only start this organization does end up making in the future. So I really do think that Truex could, in fact, end up riding with that team at some point in the Daytona 500. Because with the new charter rules especially, you can't run a fifth car, especially right now. And that's been in the charter rules for almost a decade at this point. So Joe Gibbs Racing would have to go to Tricon if they wanted to happen. There's also possibly 2311 Racing as well, but we're going to have to see how the lawsuit plays out for that to end up happening. But I think that's another team that certainly could be a major, major factor for Martin Truex Jr. as well. But I want to see Truex come back and do it again because he was really fun to listen to this week. I know he had a lot of issues with situations like the open exemption provisional clause that's in this stuff. And I do think that it'd be, again, though, be really awesome to see him make more starts. But I think that Truex coming back and running this year was such a really good thing to see. Because Martin Truex Jr. is having fun with what he's doing. And the other big question, of course, is what other starts could he make in Cup? Coke 600 is definitely an option out there. And we know that Tricon, like I said, is going to make more starts in the Cup Series at some point this year. And I think Truex getting in a really good opportunity and a really good car would certainly be really, really good. But it's good to see that he's not done with NASCAR anymore. And it seems like he's going to make some starts at some point this year. We're going to talk about the 19 car in just a short little bit on this channel. But again, it's pretty good to see that Truex got the opportunity to run the Daytona 500. I know it did not go fully the way he wanted to go, unfortunately and sadly. But I think for Truex to come back and run in this sport was really great to see. And I hope more guys that have retired at this point, like a Carl Edwards or Kurt Busch, decide to come back and maybe make a one-off in the sport in the future to close out their careers. And I think, again, it's pretty fun that Truex got to run the 500. I really hope he does get the chance and opportunity to do it once again in 2026 for the 500 and makes more starts in the NASCAR Cup Series going into the not-so-distant future. And now we're going to head jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Helio Castroneves. Now, Helio Castroneves had, unfortunately, a very rough speed weeks this weekend. But he also spoke to the media after getting caught up in the big crash that took place on lap 67 or 68 of the race on the restart of stage number 2 after Joey Logano had a checkup after having a mechanical gremlin issue going into turn number 1. And Helio had nowhere to go. He got clipped by his teammate Ross Chastain and hit the outside wall really hard. His day would come to a close and an end, and he would unfortunately end his night racing in the event. Now, after the crash had happened, he was in the garage. Helio Castroneves does say that he is hoping to run some more NASCAR races in the Cup Series in the future. However, he does know that he's probably not going to do another Super Speedway race once again. And if he does make another start in the NASCAR Cup Series or other starts, it sounds like it will probably be on a road course. So make sure, Stenhouse Jr., you don't run into him because it seems like when it comes to regular ringers, he runs into them. In all seriousness and all honesty, I don't blame Helio for not wanting to run another Super Speedway race. Helio had probably one of the worst Super Speedway weekends we've probably seen any driver have in the history of Super Speedway racing. And what's so unfortunate to me is that Helio got involved in a lot of wrecks, and a majority of those wrecks were not even his fault. Helio got caught up in a lot of crashes this weekend. The ARCA race, after the checker flag, got dumped by AJ Moore for no reason whatsoever. The ARCA crashes that happened. The course during Daytona duels. The only one he might have made a mistake was when he hit the outside wall really, really hard after basically being on the apron. That's the only time I think he made a mistake the whole entire weekend. Outside of that, he really did nothing wrong. But I saw a lot of backlash toward Helio that I think was completely unjustified. Helio Castroneves is a 4-time Indianapolis 500 winner. And in fact, there's so many media members in this industry and people that are media were trying to clown on Helio Castroneves, just really frustrating me quite a bit because Helio Castroneves is a very good race car driver who can get the best out of equipment with the right opportunities. So I didn't understand the backlash toward him this weekend. It was really unjustified. It was completely unnecessary. And I really hope he does get to come back and race once again in the near future because he deserves to be back in the sport. I think he'll be very fast competitive if he gets another chance and opportunity, especially on a road course. I think it could happen, definitely for sure. We'll see if Helio gets a chance and opportunity to road course, potentially with Trackhouse Racing, as Project 91, of course, will probably be back in some way, shape, or form once again at some point later this year. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Busch. Now, Kyle Busch was not only frustrated with Joey Logano after the Daytona 500, but Kyle Busch was also very frustrated with NASCAR, the NASCAR officials, and the damaged vehicle policy once again, as Kyle Busch not only in video form but also on his Twitter pretty much called out the damaged vehicle policy on his page, basically saying that he tried to get the team over there to get nitrogen in the car so you get the car refired. The people over there that were doing the DVP would not budge. They trailed his car back over to the garage. They were very frustrated on the radio. Randall Burnett was very angry on the radio from what I had heard, and there was a lot of anger and people that were not very happy, and Kyle Busch, because of this, was really, really frustrated with how things were going. Obviously, over the end of this year or end of last year, there was a lot of talk about damaged vehicle policy, and because of that, NASCAR decided to go ahead and overhaul it in a pretty big way. However, NASCAR did not make it perfect. Now, the one positive that could have been for Kyle Busch is the fact that Kyle Busch could have been able to get back out to the track. But here's the big issue. NASCAR will give you only one really big opportunity to get back out to the track and get up to speed. You don't have you have basically 3 laps, I think, to do it. If you don't do it in the first attempt and get up to speed within that 3 to 4 lap period, you go back to the garage, your day is done. I do think DVP definitely improved from the prior years. I think there's definitely a lot more positives with the DVP because unlike prior years where if your car went to the garage, your day was done. You can repair your car and get back out on the track. But if you have some sort of issue and you get caught up in something else and your car just isn't quick, your day is going to be over and you're not going to be able to compete anymore going forward. So I think Kyle Busch's frustration is probably toward NASCAR and RCR and some of the things going on over there, especially with this team's uncertain future right now with him. But I also do think that Kyle Busch is frustrated because of some of the officiating scrums and issues that have been going on in NASCAR right now. And I think that there's a major officiating problem that NASCAR does have currently at the moment that needs to be addressed, and I think that does need to be resolved in my opinion. Will it be resolved? We don't know at this point for sure. But I do think that the frustration for Kyle Busch, again, comes from the fact that he had a fast enough car to win the Daytona race. And instead of having a chance to win the Daytona 500 in his 20th try, his night unfortunately came to an end early because of getting caught up in someone else's mess because Joe Logano wanted to race like an idiot on the racetrack. And I do understand the frustration in a sense for Kyle Busch. That being said, though, there are rules in the DVP that probably should have been read to Kyle. And I think, again, the frustration is somewhat justified in a way. But at the same token and same time, I can't fully say that it's completely justified because there were updates to the DVP rule going into this year that probably should have been followed, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about super speedway racing. Now, if you've been on social media over the course of the last couple of days, there has been a lot of topic and a lot of discussion surrounding super speedway racing and the racing etiquette around it. And a lot of people, including myself, have voiced our frustrations a little bit in regards to super speedway racing. But it all started with Matt Weaver. Matt Weaver put out basically an article, I believe, on Sportsline and Athlon Sports as well, putting out basically talking about the issues with super speedway racing as a whole. But the name that really got a lot of recognition and many people started agreeing with was, shockingly, Denny Hamlin. Denny Hamlin, in the first 15 to 20 minutes of Actions Detrimental, spoke on his frustrations also with super speedway racing, calling it more a lack of skill for the Daytona 500. He also feels like the Daytona 500 is turning into a race more based on chance, and it's turning a less of race where basically the best of the best, guys like Dale Sr., Dale Jr., Tony Stewart, Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, would all be up front competing for wins every single year, Denny Hamlin included. They'd be up front. But Denny Hamlin does feel like, especially in the next-gen era, that super speedway racing is becoming more about being in position to win. And instead of being the best of the best all night, you basically get up there because of luck and skill. And he also defended William Byron because some were calling him Mickey Mouse on Twitter and all these platforms, and William Byron, to him, did not deserve a lot of the flack that ended up coming toward him. I agree with a lot what Denny Hamlin said. Now look, do I think the Daytona 500 was a really, really good Daytona 500? Absolutely. I thought this year's Daytona 500 was a really good Daytona 500. However, here's the big issues I have with super speedway racing as a whole, and not just super speedway racing during the Daytona 500. The super speedway racing as a whole is becoming more and more every year like a crapshoot. Back in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, you would have those big wrecks and those big carnage fests happen on the track. But the difference is they weren't happening every single super speedway race. Every Daytona 500, outside of a couple of them in the last decade or so, have had a big wreck coming to the white flag. 2015 had it. 2016 did not have it, had one of the best finishes of all time. 2017, multiple big wrecks. We had a pretty solid field mileage finish. 2018, Austin Dillon turns Aric Almirola going down the back straightaway. 2019, majority field gets caught up in wrecks and incidents. We do have a green flag finish. 2020, the Ryan Newman scary crash that took place. 2021, a big fire crash going into turn number 3. 2022, a bunch of big wrecks taking place throughout the race. 2023, we see the big one, multiple big ones. And last year, we had a caution race end under yellow, and we saw basically a controversial ending to the race. I think there needs to be some major questions in general in regards to super speedway racing. And I think the big solution is stop with the fuel mileage stuff, because I think that will break up the pack in a big way and we get a lot more green flag racing. But I also think another big thing is that the drivers are way too aggressive and no one's being held accountable. And I think if drivers can start being held accountable a lot more, like Denny Hamlin mentioned, I think there's a very likely possibility that some of the bad racing etiquette that we've been seeing on the track at these super speedways can definitely be cleaned up very, very quickly, and I hope it does get cleaned up going forward. But to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not sure if it's really ever going to get cleaned up, and that's disappointing because I think super speed racing's fun, but I do think the Daytona 500 is becoming less and less of a race built on prestige, and it's becoming more of a race based on luck and skill. There's no disrespect to William Byron. I think Byron should not be disrespected because Byron, in my opinion, put himself in a good position. But I think it should be more about the guys that are up front all the time. Guys like Denny Hamlin, Austin Cindric, Joey Logano, Chase Elliott, Kyle Busch, you name it, all going for the win. Bubba Wallace as well. And that's not happening as frequently, and you're getting a lot of fluky winners going to victory lane, which used to be common back in the day. But I'd like to see that change going forward, where the best of the best can be the guys going up front competing for the win. And I just don't see that going on, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Kyle Busch once again. As it was announced earlier today that Kyle Busch will be returning to the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series on a part-time basis in 2025. He will join Spire Motorsports for select races throughout the 2025 season, most likely in the number 7 truck for fall 5 of those races. His first race will be this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway. His next race will be scheduled in May at North Wilkesboro. After that, his next race will be at Charlotte Motor Speedway in May. Then his next race will be at Nashville in June. And his final scheduled race will be at Watkins Glen in August. Kyle Busch obviously has been expected to be back with this organization in the Truck Series for the 3rd year in a row, and will be back with the team once again this year. Kyle Busch last year competed for Spire Motorsports in 5 races with the program and picked up 2 wins throughout the year. First coming at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and then a second one coming at Texas Motor Speedway during this late spring into the early summer months. Kyle Busch being back in trucks, he will have a better opportunity to win this series, unfortunately, compared to his NASCAR Cup Series program, because we know that Rich Schultz Racing right now, they're a team that's just really struggling outside of their Super Speedway program as somewhat of their road course program as well. Well, Spire Motorsports, at least their Truck Series program, is going to be very, very competitive. And I think Kyle Busch will have a really strong chance and opportunity, especially this year, to pick up multiple wins and multiple victories throughout the 2025 season. So how many wins do I think Kyle Busch will get in the Truck Series this year? I think Kyle Busch will get 2 wins with this organization this year. I think Atlanta Motor Speedway is most likely to be the first race. Kyle Busch is the defending winner of the spring race at Atlanta Motor Speedway. Kyle Busch knows and understands the draft. He's won Atlanta before in the prior restrictor plate area, and before the Super Speedway era of Atlanta, he used to win there quite a bit in the Truck Series, in the Xfinity Series as well. He's always been good at this track, so I look for Kyle Busch to have a really good chance to win Atlanta. North Wilkesboro, I think he's going to have a good chance and opportunity to win there, considering the 7 truck has won there prior a couple years ago in 2023 with Kyle Larson. And Spire last year had a really strong truck with multiple drivers behind the wheel last year. So I do think he'll have a good chance and opportunity to win there. I circle Charlotte as one of the favorites to get that second win, because I think Charlotte's going to be a really good track for Kyle. Kyle Busch is one of the best in the history in the Truck Series at that track, so I think Kyle Busch will definitely be a major factor in serious contender to go to victory lane at Charlotte. Nashville, I think will have a good chance as well there, considering Nashville's a really good track for Spire and also a really good track for Kyle, as Kyle Busch, I think, has like 3 or 4 Truck Series wins at that track, including back in 2010, where I believe he picked up his 25th career NASCAR truck win at the time. So I do think he'll be a major factor at that track as well. And then Watkins Glen, I think will be a contender as well, though if Connor Zilch is in that race, and there's a chance he could be behind the wheel of the truck this year at some point with the 07, I didn't think Connor's going to win. You got Brent Cruz, who I think is driving Watkins Glen, if I'm not mistaken, with Tricon, so it's going to be tough to beat him there. And Corey Haim's also going to be a pretty big factor at that track as well. But realistically, for Kyle Busch, I think he will be a major contender to win multiple races this year. And we also know, by the way, that Mike Mandel is going to be in the 07 truck this week in Atlanta. Got some other races scheduled as well with the program. So you got 2 really strong drivers joining the team. And this could be a potential landing spot if Kyle Busch doesn't go back to RCR 2026. This could be a landing spot with their Cup program if McDowell decides to somehow retire at the end of the year. I could see Kyle Busch taking over the 71 car in the Cup Series in 2026 as certainly a possibility. There was talk about him maybe going to Spire last year, at least on the Cup side. He He's worked there as a consultant. I think he's been a major asset to consulting with that group, to making that team a lot better. I think it's really awesome, though, that Kyle Busch will be back with the Spire organization this year. I think he's got a really strong chance and a really great opportunity to get multiple wins, and I think he will definitely, for sure, pick up a couple wins and a couple victories with the Spire Motorsports team in 2025. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode, as we're talking about Aric Almirola. Now, we did a video covering this on this channel earlier today, but it was confirmed early today that Aric Almirola will be returning to the NASCAR Xfinity Series in 2025, as it was confirmed he'll be returning to Joe Gibbs Racing in select races in 2025, driving a number 19 car for 9 races in the 2025 season with YoungLife.org as a sponsor. His first race will be scheduled this weekend at Atlanta Motor Speedway, and while the rest schedule has not been announced, I would think he'll probably run some short tracks with the program and probably some other intermediate races with the team as well. Aric Almirola drove for this team last year in 2024, and to be honest, had a really solid and a really good season with this team last year. Aric Almirola made a ton of starts in the 20 and also the number 19 car as well, and was very, very competitive, picking up 3 wins with the team last year, sweeping at Martinsville Speedway, and also picking up the win at Kansas at the end of the season as well. He is going to be a major factor to win with this team this year. The 19 car is basically former 20 car, and this is going to be the all-star car for the program this year, as Justin Bonzanore's got 8 more races scheduled in this car, and we also know Chase Briscoe is going to be running at Charlotte Motor Speedway as well. And we know Aric Almirola, despite the fact he's not full-time, he has still got it and is going to be a guy to watch out for throughout the year. And it's a shame to see that Aric is not full-time with this program. I get he wants to spend a lot more time with this family, but with the weekends being a lot shorter, I'm a little surprised to see he's not behind the wheel of a 19 car at least a little bit more in 2025. So, what are my realistic expectations for Aric Almirola this year? Well, number one, I think Aric Almirola, very similar to Kyle Busch, like we talked about a little bit ago. I do think that Aric Almirola does have a really strong chance and a really great opportunity to pick up at least a couple wins this year. And I think he could have a 2 to 3 win season. I look at tracks that have not been announced, but if Martinsville's on the schedule and he runs both Martinsville races, I think it's very likely he'll sweep in Martinsville. I think Richmond's on the schedule for Xfinity, if I'm not mistaken. That's the race I have circled for Aric Almirola to win. And I think it'll be a big factor some of the intermediate tracks as well, especially Vegas. If that's on his schedule, I think he'll have a really good chance to win there, considering he did that 19, which was a 20 last year, was really good with John Hunter Nemechek. I do think that Almirola will definitely be a big factor to go to victory lane. There was a lot of stuff that happened last year for Almirola. He was very, very competitive, but he also did have some issues on and off the track. He got into that scuffle and feud with Bubba Wallace throughout the year. He also, of course, did get suspended. At that point, there were some questions if he was still with the team. He was pondering about retiring at the end of last year, and definitely he decided to stick around and run another season in Xfinity competition. Though he's not full-time this year, it is really good to see him be over at that program. And I think it's really huge for the drivers at the team, especially when you look at how young the Xfinity lineup is for the program this year. You've got William Swalch, who just turned 18 about 4 months ago. You've got Brandon Jones, who's a little bit older, but he's still younger than Aric Almirola by over a decade, who's the oldest full-time guy, and he's still only 28 years old, will be 29 by the end of the year. And then, of course, you have Taylor Gray, who will turn 20 in a couple weeks from now. I think having an older veteran that can consult these guys and work with them, I think that is going to be absolutely huge for the success of Joe Gibbs Racing going forward in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. And I really like the direction that this team is going with to bring Aric Almirola back to the program. And I think it is going to be a really strong year for Aric Almirola. He hasn't announced what other plans he's going to have for the year. I could see him making some truck starts with a team like Tory Racing at some point this year. I also could see Aric Almirola potentially maybe making a 1 or 2 start cup run with 20-11, considering 20-11 is expected to have a 4th car at least on a part-time basis this year. Maybe he also gets an opportunity of legacy in the 84 car, along with Kaz Grau as well. That could certainly be a possibility in a shout. But I think it's great that Aric Almirola is back in the Xfinity Series this year. I think, like I've already mentioned and said, I think he will get multiple wins and multiple victories throughout the 2025 season. I do think it's going to be a pretty big year for the number 19 team as he progresses throughout the year in the season. So, again, we'll see how he does. But like I've already mentioned and said, I do think Almirola will be a major factor in serious contender to win. He's going to have some good competition this weekend. I think he'll be one of the favorites to win, but he's still going to have to go through guys like Austin Hill, Jesse Love, Carson Quaffle, Connor Zilic, Justin Allgaier, Sammy Smith, Harrison Burn with AM Racing, other people in the field like Christian Eckes this year, Nick Sanchez, potentially Corey Hyman to select race he runs. He is going to have a lot of strong and really good competition that he is going to have to go up against throughout the 2025 season, but I think it's really good. He is back in the Xfinity Series this year, and I do look for the number 19 car with Aric behind the wheel of that car. I think he will be a pretty big factor to be a pretty good competitor with these teams in 2025. Glad to see he'll be back with Joe Gibbs Racing this year. And now we're going to jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Junior Motorsports once again. Now, of course, Junior Motorsports made their NASCAR Cup Series debut on Sunday night with Justin Allgaier behind the wheel. They survived some of the carnages and the wrecks, and they got themselves a very respectable finish, finishing in 9th place in the Daytona 500 on their debut. And after the Daytona 500 had officially concluded with them finishing inside the top 10, Dale Jr. was very giddy and very happy about the finish, being interviewed by Jamie Little and also speaking to the media as well. He did confirm to the media after the race had concluded that it sounds like we could see Junior Motorsports make some more NASCAR Cup Series starts in 2025 if they could find the right partners to work with them later this year. And also there's a potential possibility that Junior Motorsports could be looking to get back into the charter game and go after a charter going into the 2026 NASCAR Cup Series season, and they could potentially go full-time in 2026 as well. This news right here is absolutely huge. Let's begin by talking about Junior Motorsports making more starts in 2025. Like I already mentioned and said, it would have to come down to finding the right partners to make more starts in 2025. I think if Chris Stapleton, who apparently had a ton of fun and was on the pit box the whole entire Daytona 500, I think we could see Travelers Whiskey partner up with Junior Motorsports in a pretty big way, and maybe somehow Chris Stapleton finds his way into the ownership group over at Junior Motorsports, which could lead to them making more starts because Travelers Whiskey is a pretty big whiskey company. It'd be really huge to see them work with the Junior Motorsports brand once again in 2025. And I would have to think there's probably going to be some more starts scheduled. Now, realistically, I think they're probably going to, if they're going to run more starts this year, it's probably going to be very similar to what they've got in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, or basically what Beer Motorsports is doing currently at the moment right now, where they run all the super speedway races. So probably not Atlanta, but I have to think Talladega, and then probably the summer Daytona race, and then probably, of course, Talladega once again at the end of the year. I would have to think maybe they give an opportunity to all their drivers. Maybe we see Sammy Smith run the next Super Speedway race at Talladega behind the wheel. Sammy, I believe, turns 21 this year. I don't know if he would be the next one to do it, so probably later in the year at Daytona. Maybe we see Carson Quaffle. I think he turns 21 this year as well. I think he'd be a good opportunity to see him make his Cup debut. That'd be wild. And maybe Connor Zilic down the road at the end of the year, if he doesn't get more starts in the Cup Series, which I think he will make more starts in Cup, by the way, outside of COTA, I could see him getting an opportunity behind the wheel as well of that car. But now going to 2026, we've obviously heard a lot of talk over the last couple of years about Junior Motorsports in the future going full-time NASCAR Cup Series racing. But the big thing that they're going to need, if they're going to want to be a full-time NASCAR Cup Series team in 2026, the big thing is going to be a charter. A charter to run the full season to get the prize money, among other things. Now, depending on how the situation goes with the lawsuit, this could have a big impact on the future, because I think Dale Jr. might be looking at the lawsuit as well. There is some outside talk and conversations about the future of the charters going away. If 24M Racing and Front Row win their lawsuit, NASCAR is already talking about removing the charter system, and they could go to something very similar to how the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series do their business model, which could have a major impact on some of these smaller teams, especially like 2311 Front Row and some of the other teams like Trackhouse. They could find their way out. But let's say they don't get rid of the charter system and continues on. Where could Junior Motorsports get a charter from? One team I look at maybe is Hayek Motorsports. I could certainly see that being possibly finding a partnership with them. I don't know what the future of that team looks like past this year. They're just piecing sponsors on a week-by-week basis right now. They do have a sponsor for this weekend at Atlanta, but I think that's one team you have to look at because they're having trouble trying to find those big partners for the future. So Hayek could be one I'd be looking at. Another big one would be Kaulig Racing. Look, as much as Kaulig Racing, they want to get a lot better, and they had a decent run this weekend at Daytona with Ty Dillon especially. I just don't see Kaulig having 2 full-time charters unless they find a way to put Daniel Suarez in that second car at Kaulig next year, because Suarez does bring sponsorship and funding to the table, and that'd be a pretty big asset for him to stick around over there with 2 full-time cars. And AJ Allmendinger, I think, will be back in the 16 car next year, most likely, because AJ has a contract with Team Elite, believe, at least through 2029 or 2030 at this point. So AJ is probably not going anywhere for the next 5 years at this point in Cup. But I do think that's one team to watch out for. We don't know what the future of the Haas factory team is. They could eventually expand again as well and get a lot better. So you got to look at Hayek as the most likely realistic option. Some also mention maybe a partnership down the road with Trackhouse, considering that Trackhouse and Junior Motorsports are working a lot more closely tightened. I could see Justin Marks finding a way to maybe get a chance to be a part-time partner over there with Junior Motorsports, considering you've got Connor Zillage making starts full-time for Junior Motorsports this year, and you've got Shane Van Gisbergen and Ross Chastain, who are going to make select starts in the Xfinity Series, including next week at Circuit Americas, with Chastain getting behind the wheel and Shane Van Gisbergen making 4 starts in that 9 car as well, and maybe other guys in the Trackhouse family getting affiliated with that. So I think that is certainly a possibility going forward in the future as well, with Trackhouse being one of the teams to watch out for, and considering the fact that Pitbull just left very, very recently, I think there could be a thought on that it's actually very, very possible, and it's definitely certainly a possibility. I think it'd be really awesome to see Junior Motorsports, them go full-time NASCAR Cup racing in the future as well. And I think that there is a very realistic chance, after 4 or 5 years of speculation on it and talks and conversation from all of us who've been speculating, been wanting it to happen, I think there's a very realistic possibility. This is going to be a major story to watch out for throughout the year. I think one of the biggest storylines to follow, because there's probably going to be updates on this throughout the year, and I do think it is going to be a more realistic possibility. If they do go full-time in 2026, I do think there's a chance Justin Allgaier will be the full-time driver, considering he did drive for them this year at the Daytona 500. I think Carson Quaffle could certainly be an option, with him being a lot younger driver, and I'm not sure if Carson Quaffle, who has never made a Cup start at this point, I don't know if he'd be ready. Sammy Smith, I'm not sure. He could be a candidate, especially with a sponsorship he brings, but I don't think Sammy Smith's a Cup driver yet at this point. Allgaier would definitely make the most sense if they go full-time. I don't see him going after like a Matt DiBenedetto, or because with him being Chevy, I don't see him getting the opportunity. Anthony Fredo could also be an option as well, considering he's working with Hendrick Motorsports, and Junior Motorsports has a pretty close tight alliance with Hendrick. So we'll have to wait and see who they decide to put behind the wheel of the car if they do go full-time. But I do think there's a really good chance and possibility that we could see them go full-time in 2026. And I think the fact there's a lot of talk that it might end up happening is really, really exciting and really great to see. We'll see if JRM does, in fact, decide to have a NASCAR Cup Series program in 2026. So, that is going to be today's long NASCAR news and motorsports news episode. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel, notifications on, so if I win a video, it does go live on my channel. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Let us description below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's episode. You think Junior Motorsports actually will go NASCAR Cup racing in 2026 or not? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And I think Aric Almirola is going to do what Joe Gibbs Racing this year. Do you think he's going to win race or not? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. There will be more content most likely dropping today on the channel. Tomorrow we're going to have basically the race picks for the Xfinity Series and the Truck Series at Atlanta. Then, of course, on Thursday we'll have Cup race picks for Atlanta. And, of course, the Paintscape video on Friday. We should have 2 NASCAR news videos dropping on the channel most likely. Then Saturday we'll have some other content dropping as well with the race reviews, among other things. We'll have the Cup race review at Atlanta and a Shane Van Gisbergen video as well. We'll have content coming out, people like SVG, Haley Deegan, Carl Edwards, Kurt Busch, Kyle Larson, Chase Elliott, Prime Energy, all that good stuff. KSI Logan Paul, Donald Trump, Clayton Carl, Matt DiBenedetto, Frankie Muniz, all the good stuff will be coming out on the channel very soon in the coming weeks. Same with Sheldon Crease and Mayer. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, buddy.